Welcome to the Circular Economy Show. I'm Lou.
And I'm Seb, and this month's episode is focused on the circular economy as an economic opportunity that is regenerative by design, doing more good and not just less bad.
In this episode, Janine Benyus, the founder of Biomimicry, will be sharing how we can create systems to ensure nature is regenerated and flourishes.
We are heading to Gothelney Farm in Somerset to see the transition from conventional to regenerative agriculture in action.
We're finding out how these different businesses are changing how food works in London.
And we'll be asking our very own Joe Isles your questions about circular design. God, we do get a lot into these episodes, Lou, don't we? And it's your second episode. Have you had a good month?
I've had a brilliant month. And do you know what? Spring is in the air, so bring it on.
Spring is in the air. Also in the air for a long time now, unfortunately, has been the topic of economic uncertainty. And we've certainly covered that a lot during the Circular Economy show. And it seems that as the topic of economic uncertainty increases, so does the relevance of a circular economy. So let's head to our archive now and hear from Frans Timmermans from the European Commission and Audrey Choi from Morgan Stanley talking about the relevance and significance of a circular economy in the context of a global pandemic, of climate change and of economic recession.
I think there's been a real shift of people not just seeing circular economy as something that in many people's minds invokes, ooh, that must mean less growth, right? If we're using stuff over and over again and we're producing less stuff, that must be less growth. People are now understanding that that can actually be an incredibly compelling growth opportunity and therefore investment opportunity. So we've been very excited to see the progress there.
Well, we made a mistake in the previous crisis, and that is that we rebuilt things that were of the past. Now we have to build our future. And if we do it right, we can combine the need to recover from this pandemic with the need to transform our economies into sustainable economies. And the Green Deal is our way forward.
I think people are much more interested in things where companies are saying we are going to rethink our design, rethink our supply chain, rethink our end-of-life capture, rather than saying we're going to host a lovely cleanup or we're going to write big checks towards some lovely cause. It's really about how do you use your business as a driver to create more value and also to create investment benefits. One, we've seen an increasing trend in investors being more and more interested not just in sustainable investing generally, but in very specific targeted themes. And when we ask them what themes are you most interested, the very top three were climate change, plastic waste reduction, and circular economy.
People in the financial world, whether it's investors, whether it's bankers, they make very rational decisions. And they have seen that if they do not change the way they invest, if they do not invest in a circular economy, in a future-oriented sustainable economy, they will create for themselves huge amounts of stranded assets. The money they will then invest in the old economy will be lost to them within 5 to 10 years.
I think I'm optimistic that hopefully now with everyone being very innovative and creative, if we can fund and support and connect those people think about redoing the value chain, not going back to the past, but really sort of figuring out a new, more sustainable circular model, I think there's tremendous ability to undo a lot of the damage that's been created in our lifetimes.
I no longer fear those who pretend there is no climate crisis. I fear a situation where we become desperate, that we believe we cannot fix it anymore. We can fix this. If humanity can fix something, it is this. It is an existential threat to the human race, but the human race can face that threat and face it down.
So we heard from Audrey Choi and Franz Timmons there that even in times of economic uncertainty, the circular economy represents a significant opportunity. And I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about that on the Circular Economy Show in 2023. Another thing we'll be hearing a lot about in 2023, and indeed in this episode, is the topic of regenerative. How do we create a world where positive impacts on nature are the natural outcome of our economic activity?
And that is why I'm really looking forward to this next piece. Janine Benyus talks with such passion about how human systems can work in harmony with nature.
So this next video is taken from a longer lecture that Janine gave, where she talks about what does she mean by regenerative, and she places the concept in a context that isn't food.
So we actually set about at Biomimicry 3.8 to see if we could design for ecosystem services. And we said, well, people said, okay, well, you're probably going to plant a lot of plants because they'll cool the air, they'll build soil for you. The plants will do it. Because as a toddler, which we are, we're a very young species, 200,000 to 300,000 years compared to 3.8 billion years. So in our toddler age, we're just like, well, if we want to do all these good things, we'll just plant some things and nature will do it. The rest of nature will do it for us. Not really. Let's figure out how to have our buildings, our infrastructure, our sidewalks, our roadways, our buildings pull their ecological weight as well. They should be storing water. They should be storing carbon. They should be cooling the air, right? Helping to mitigate floods, stopping erosion. What if in everything you built, like I walk on sidewalks now and I say, is that all you're doing? Is holding me up? Why aren't you permeable? Why aren't you storing water? Why aren't you purifying the air through photocatalytic cement? Why aren't you storing CO2 by biomimetic cement that works like coral, based on coral reefs to store that CO2? We only get that if we start to ask that of our designs. So what we do is we benchmark biological systems that are right next door, what the city would be if we weren't there, right? It would be a forest, or it would be a prairie, or a combination of such. And we go and we actually benchmark the ecosystem gifts that system is doing and their quantities. So we go out, we measure a place like this and we say, okay, we have this iPad app, and we look at all the services, and we know how much carbon is being sequestered or how much water is being stored. So suddenly your landscape architects are not just putting in gumdrop shrubs, they're putting in something that's a bioirrigator, something that attracts nesting and pollinating species, right? They're creating, and your architects are creating habitecture, they're creating niches for birds to live in, right? And we're actually inviting in that sort of habitat support as part of the design. So what if all buildings could purify water? This is San Francisco Airport, where Brent Constance, who studied coral reefs to figure out how to take CO2 like they do and turn it into cement. Reefs are the biggest cement, they're the biggest artifact on the planet, and they're cement, essentially. So he mimics that. It's a biomimetic cement. It's a company called Blue Planet, and if you go into the San Francisco Airport, that's your aggregate and your concrete. It's sequestering CO2. The Bank of America building has an HVAC system on it that cleans the air, and it comes into New York City. New York City air comes in, it leaves 3 times cleaner. Why don't all buildings do that? Right, we haven't asked.
So what's the goal? That's what Janine really challenges us to ask ourselves. Are we really saying that we can only do a little less bad? We need to set our ambition levels much higher than that. And the topic of regenerative, of course, applies in many different contexts. And to help us to explore another one of those contexts, we welcome to the studio Rhaenyra, our Food Initiative Lead here at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Welcome, Rhaenyra. Now, about 1.5 years ago, the Foundation published this report, The Big Food Redesign. Before we get into what's contained within this report, I guess the Big Food Redesign implies that our food is designed. Is our food designed?
Yes, Seb, it is. And it's a strange concept to think about. But we need to think about it as, if you think about your cereals or your chocolate bars, this is a product, okay? And every product, somewhere, someone has had a concept about how that product is put together. So they've come up with a concept, and they've then made decisions around what ingredients go into it. So what is the recipe made of? They've then made decisions around where are those ingredients sourced from, and how is that product packaged? And every single one of those is a design decision. So yeah, our food is all designed.
So will redesigning food actually allow nature to thrive?
Well, we think it will, Lou. So in the Big Food Redesign, we outline an actionable framework. So it's a framework that looks at overlaying circular design principles with food design. And we've come up with 4 different design opportunities that we hope that food designers around the world will engage with to be able to rethink the food design decisions they make by putting nature at the heart of them. So the 4 design decisions are that the first one is that all ingredients need to be regeneratively sourced. So we need to be thinking about this farming systems in which ingredients are coming from, and choosing ingredients that come from farming systems that do enable soil health to thrive and build back biodiversity. The second opportunity is about thinking about diverse ingredients. So if you think back to what I said about that statistic, well, if we can broaden the range of edible crops that we're putting into our food, and different types of varieties of livestock or crop. I mean, another great example is we use a handful of numbers of potatoes, like 5 to 10 types of potatoes that you get in the supermarkets. They're like 4,500 different kinds of potatoes around the world. So think about diversifying the range of ingredients or the varieties of ingredients that we're putting into our products. And that diversification starts to build resilience into our landscape because they're less susceptible to pests, etc. The third principle or design opportunity is about lower impact ingredients. And we hear a lot today in the media around the need to move from animal proteins to plant proteins. So eat less meat, eat more plants. But we're saying it's more than that, actually. It's about choosing plant varieties that have less impact on the soil. So legumes, beans and peas and things like that, they lock nitrogen in the soil. So if a farmer is planting those sorts of ingredients, they don't have to use external input. So how do you design a food product that enables a farmer to farm in that way? And the fourth design principle is around upcycled ingredients. So we hear a lot about food loss and waste, but often that's talked about in food that's gone past the farm gate. Our report talks about how we could create value out of on-farm crop residue. And I think probably my favorite statistic from that report is that there's globally about 2.8 billion tons of on-farm crop residue that is out there a year. Less than 1.5% of that, if we extracted the sugars from it, we would have no further need for glucose syrup across the world.
Rhaenyra, I need to thank you because you've given me a new idea for the Circle Me show. I'm going to try the 4,500 varieties of potatoes over the course of this year. So our food is designed. We need to think differently about how we're setting that system up, what ambitions we have, what incentives we're having. But there's a design opportunity there for designers, and there are designers in the food system, therefore, who can take action and do things differently today. We're about to watch a film about one farmer's kind of journey from conventional to regenerative practices, outcomes on their farm. But we also recognise that we need action at all different scales across the system, from the largest food companies to individual farmers. So what can large food companies take from a story like that we're going to see with this individual farmer?
So I think, I love this film, by the way. I think it's really beautiful. For me, there are 3 things that large food companies can take. The first one is it is possible. It is possible to farm differently and to have the yields that we have today coming off the land. There is a transition period, and you'll see that in the film. But I think the idea that it is hopeful and it is possible, that's certainly something that I think large companies can take from this. I think the second piece that they can take from it is look at the dynamic between the farmer and the baker who uses what comes off his land. And they can really start to think about how can they change that relationship with farmers? How can they shorten their supply chains to really get back to understanding what the land can give them, and therefore how they can design food products to enable the land to give them what it needs. And the third piece for me is really about them understanding. So once they've accepted that it is possible and that we need a new dynamic with farmers, that they have the ability to significantly reshape our landscapes. You know, the scale at which they operate, if they could get all the farmers that work to supply their ingredients to be able to farm regeneratively, the impact on soil health, biodiversity, water and air quality would be phenomenal.
I really like what you say about it being possible, that actually our ability to be regenerative in terms of how we manage land is not the problem here, it's what we design around it. Rhaenyra, thank you for joining us on the Circular Economy show. So let's turn our attention now to this story of this farmer and his journey and his family's journey over a 15-year period, and just see what is possible.
Can farming like this feed the world? I firmly believe it can, if not it does. But you have to change the food system in order to be able to make the decisions you want to on farm.
My grandfather moved here in the 50s and was part of this wave of industrialisation of agriculture, and his domain was pigs. He was part of that focus on ripping out hedgerows and putting stock inside. And my aunt ran it for 30 years until we moved back in 2007.
The business we inherited was quite deeply entrenched in the kind of big food system. So we were producing commodities, wheat, barley, oilseed rape, and selling them on global markets, which have really nothing to do with how much it costs to produce a ton of wheat here in Somerset.
Yeah, going to do that bag as well. The first 5 years we were entrenched in the industrial system. The middle 5 years we were really like thinking about what was really going on. Why was there this yield plateau? My mindset shifted from still trying to be an industrial farmer by fixing soil fertility and by considering the soil biology, to then seeing what was really going on in the soil and realizing that the two systems were just fundamentally incompatible. The process of transformation for me was just about lots and lots of simple, small decisions that all add up to, 15 years later, a farm that is totally different. And that also led us to start really thinking about what food system we were involved in as well. We have a 4-year rotation, 2 years of diverse lays running into 2 years of arable cropping. And half of the arable cropping goes to Southwest bakeries, including Rosie's Bakery on the farm, and the other half goes to feed the pigs, which are a really important part of the fertility part of the system.
I wanted to start here by saying, how do I want to do this? And in the old system, I couldn't do that. You had to work back from a price that you didn't set, and therefore that pushed you down a completely different trajectory in terms of thinking about scale and yield and cost. It's a totally different existence, really, and identity as a farmer. But it really matters, because, you know, when I was farming conventionally, we were constantly trying to impose ourselves and effectively beat nature. And now everything we're doing is kind of enhancing it or working with or feeling for the boundaries. And it's such a big difference from where we were 15 years ago. The point of regenerative is it's a mindset, it's an approach, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of being on the farm. So as soon as you codify it, you stop it being a living, like moving thing. The whole essence of what we're trying to achieve is a resilient farming system. So that doesn't mean boom yields or bust yields. It means accepting a stable, sustainable yield, whether it's the stock that's coming off the ground and the carrying capacity, or it's the yield of the wheat or the emmer or the cereals that are going into the bakeries. Okay. Imagine I carry some grain to Rosie's mill, she mills it, I take the bran from the mill and I feed it back to the pigs, and then she makes a sausage roll with the meat from the pigs and puts it in the pastry that's made from the grain. I mean, that's just like, that would never happen in an industrialized system.
We're giving people the opportunity to put something in their bodies that's nutritious and comes from somewhere, from a place where so much good intention has gone into making these choices around that end-baked good. We have this amazing opportunity to sort out problems between us and within our network. It's really empowering to do that rather than to think that someone else is going to solve the food system crisis. I'm giving feedback on varieties and what's functioning well and what's tasting really good in the bakery, and that informs what he grows.
The easiest way of communicating all of the stuff we're doing is to just remove that disconnect between what we're doing and who's eating it. So bring people to the farm and feed our local community. That's what small food brings. Is you don't have to package that up into like a neat, sexy one-liner. You can just let everyone consume the farm through their own lens, kind of thing. Uh-oh, what? It sort of doesn't matter, or it matters a lot less how many pounds per tonne the wheat is. We're like deeply embedded in this food system together. Is that touching? I'm not quite sure. Right, back to the tractor. Back to the tractor. And the interesting thing, coming full circle, is that we're now thinking about yield again, because the farm is like rewarding us with a really actually highly fertile, productive ecosystem. How do we prevent regenerative from becoming packaged up and codified and a minimum standard? You know, how do we enshrine it and keep it in our own hands and as a lived experience? Oh, you've been a good girl, haven't you? What colour's this one? Green. Right, let's get you done, Eric. If I think about the future, it's less about what hopes I have. Hope implies that we have some grand plan. We don't hope, and it's more about trusting what we're doing and let the farm set the future.
So regenerative is a mindset shift. It's not just about doing a little bit less bad or tweaking around the edges. It's about changing the whole system. And we really saw that on that story, that journey of Gothelney Farm.
But how does that translate economically? We recently went and visited a few different food businesses in London to find out how they're getting food from farm to fork.
In very practical terms, what we do is we run a weekly box scheme that serves around 1,400 customers in Hackney. We run a weekly organic farmers market, which serves an equivalent number of people. We also do some food growing ourselves here in Hackney. So we run a patchwork farm, and we also have a farm in Dagenham. But the majority of our produce comes from farmers in what we call the rural hinterland, so it's farmers in Kent and Essex. And so in total, we trade with around 25 or so farmers, and we feed around 6,000 people a week. Probably a decade ago now, we decided we would try and help other groups to set up similar projects, so we launched something called our Startup Programme. And as a result of that, we helped, 10 or 15 other community-led box schemes to get up and running. And they have since sort of formed into something we're calling the Better Food Traders Network, which we also run. So we have the Better Food Traders Network, we have growing communities who are a member of the Better Food Traders Network, and then we set up the Better Food Shed.
The Better Food Shed is a farmer-focused aggregator of agroecological produce. We supply veg box schemes across London with produce from organic farms across the UK. We're farmer-focused in that we work with farmers to sell their produce for them. We work with them to build cropping plans together, so they are growing stuff for us that we need, and in exchange we make a commitment to them to sell what they have. So we could feed another 4,000 households across London through supplying to universities, to schools, to hospitals, and in doing so enable us to get food to a much broader section of society than we currently do.
In terms of what we do here, we're creating work, we're creating good work, and we're building wealth here in this community that we're also based in. So, and I think our customers and our members get a pretty amazing deal too. We did a report recently with the New Economics Foundation, and this showed that for every £1 that a customer spends with us, it generates £3.70 more of public benefits to them personally, to the farmers, to the environment, and to the local economy.
On Sitopia Farm, we're growing a wide variety of different veg, fruit and flowers, including a lot of heritage varieties that are at risk of being lost. And we are trying to give Londoners a flavour of foods they might not have tasted before. So first of all, we're organic, so we don't use any kind of chemical fertiliser, pesticide, herbicide, anything like that at all. Secondly, we're no dig, so that means we try and disturb the soil as little as we possibly can. Farming this way helps with both climate adaptation and mitigation. So soil has enormous potential to store huge amounts of carbon, but only if certain conditions are there. So if the soil is full of life and different microorganisms, plants and animals, it's possible for the plants and the organisms in the soil to create a symbiotic relationship, which means that the carbon that the plants suck out of the air is actually channeled down and fixed in the soil, not just held within the plant itself, but fixed within the soil. So if you have healthy soil that's full of life, you get to by sort of looking after the soil and not disturbing it, then we can store huge amounts of carbon in the soil, which is huge when you're facing increasing temperatures in a sort of climate reality. We've been taught in the UK that the most important thing about food is the price, not the flavour, not how it was produced, not sustainability. And so we're having to produce food in this way and sort of change people's expectations of the food that they buy at the same time. The reality is we're in a cost of living crisis, and sustainable food costs more to produce than what you're going to be able to buy in Asda. So what we need is government policy that means that everybody can afford to buy healthy, sustainable food. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, because otherwise economically it's very difficult to compete.
What we've got here is an economic system that is playing against everything that we're trying to do. We've got an economic system that's stacked against us, and we are basically pushing against that with this model that is economically viable, but we have to work really hard to make this work. And we could do with some help from people helping to level that playing field, and local authorities would be a key player in that.
So we've heard how regenerative plays out in the built environment space with Janine Benyus. We've seen it on a farm in Somerset, and we've visited London to see how that regenerative food makes its way into the city and the environment and onto our plates. So welcome back to the studio, and now we're joined in the studio by Jo Isles, our circular design lead, who's joining us for our second, Lou, big questions segment.
I know. Now, Jo, I'm not going to grill you on regeneratively grown organic vegetables. I'm going to roast you on everything circular and design.
Good.
Your first question is, why is design so important to the circular economy?
Well, really, design and the circular economy go together hand in glove. We're not talking about, when we talk about circular economy, just treating the symptoms of an economy that doesn't work, creates waste and pollution. We're talking about addressing the root cause. So intuitively, design's part of the answer there. And when you go a level further, everything around us is designed. For some things, that's really obvious. We talk about designer clothes. We know that they're designed. But the places we live, the places we buy our food, the systems which give us mobility and help us communicate, they're all designed. And if you take one simple thing like a piece of takeaway cutlery from a restaurant, we think about the way it looks, the way it feels in our hand, the color, the type of material. Those are all obvious design choices. But design choices also influenced the price of the thing, why we need takeaway cutlery, the business model that surrounds it, where those materials come from and when they might end up. So design is a really pervasive force in our economy. And that's why if we want to see the shift to a circular economy, we really need to be leveraging design and working with designers and creative professionals.
So design and the circular economy go in hand in glove. Everything is designed, and we need to take on this kind of bigger view of what design actually is. A question we obviously get asked almost all the time is, but why would you do this? What are the opportunities and advantages of adopting the circular economy and designing for a circular economy?
Well, there are huge opportunities in designing for a circular economy. First and foremost, there's resource use. So the opportunity to really engage with and use resources in a different way. So to use things without using them up, or to get a greater sort of intensity out of the products and materials that we find in our economy. There's the environmental benefits. We know that 45% of emissions come from how we make and use things, how we grow food, and how we manage land. And that's where we need circular economy strategies to try and tackle those emissions.
Jo, we've heard a lot recently about circular-ish. Can you tell us a bit more about what that actually means?
Yeah, so circular-ish is a colloquial term that I believe I came up with, but I'll happily have CE Show viewers tell me if I'm plagiarising. Circular-ish I think of as an attitude, as an approach to innovation for the circular economy. We know that most of the innovation we need for a circular economy hasn't been done yet. And I think whilst we talk about systems change and the need for systems change, we know that doesn't happen immediately. Maybe if there's some sort of revolution or something like that. But we know that systems change for a circular economy really will happen through lots of sort of innumerable connected smaller innovations, lots of dead ends, lots of false starts, and lots of successful breakthroughs along the way. So circular-ish is really about getting more realistic about that and saying, no one can do it straight away. It doesn't happen overnight in one flash of brilliance. And there are designers who really get it. They really understand what the circular economy is, but the thing that they've done is not complete. So I wonder if we say you didn't get it right, or you didn't try hard enough, whether that's actually quite that undermines them. And really we could be saying it's a good start. Don't get hooked on some of these first steps, and keep innovating, keep heading towards those more ambitious outcomes.
Actually, Joe, I was asked about circular-ish in an event in Amsterdam. I thought to myself, gosh, I'm friends with this guy who's has this world-famous concept.
Yeah. I should be trademarking it now, I think.
Yeah, it's probably too late.
You have, haven't you?
Joe, thanks so much for coming on the Circle Me show. I hope it is the first of many visits to our studio, and I'm sure it will be.
Thanks, Seb. I hope so too.
Me too. And don't forget, it's your turn now. Send in your questions and we'll have our next expert on next month to answer them for you. What's the hashtag, Seb?
So you need to use the hashtag AskTheCE and you can also @ us on LinkedIn @Ellen MacArthur Foundation or on Twitter using @CircularEconomy. Thank you so much for watching this episode of The Circle Me Show. We're already 2 months in, only 10 months left of the year. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube to get notified every time we post a new episode of The Circle Me Show, or indeed every time the Ellen MacArthur Foundation posts new content. And make sure you click that bell icon to get that sent directly to your notifications. We'll see you next time.